Now, we welcome to the stage the Executive Director of the Groundwork Collaborative, Lindsay Owens.
So we're kicking off EconCon a little differently today. We're going to start with a panel and keynote focused on our future. And that starts by featuring voices from the most diverse generations our country has known, Gen Z and millennials. These two generations have a lot to teach us about how to build an economy that works for all of us. And that's in part because they haven't been fooled by the false promises of neoliberalism because they've never materialized for them. They lived through recessions, climate disasters, and pandemics, and they're under no illusion that these problems will be solved simply by leaving things to the market. They want the government to take deliberative action to solve the big problems we all face, to invest in them, in their families, and in their communities. And they want government to wield its power to shape the rules so that everyone can thrive. So today we're going to hear how young people are leading the charge to build that better economy and better future, starting with the first keynote speaker of the conference, a woman on the front lines of the fight to build a more just economy for future generations, Congresswoman Delia Ramirez. So at a time when more than half of members of Congress are millionaires and the average age of a member of the US House is 58, Representative Ramirez is bucking both trends. A millennial freshman representing the 3rd District of Illinois, Ramirez didn't get to Washington because of her coziness with the donor class. In fact, she doesn't take corporate contributions at all. Instead, she was called upon to serve by members of her community in her hometown on the west side of Chicago, first in the Illinois State House and now in Congress. The daughter of working-class Guatemalan immigrants who grew up in subsidized housing above a local church, Congresswoman Ramirez developed a deep commitment to community and a passion for economic justice early. First at home, watching her parents trade childcare duties with shifts at their multiple low-wage jobs, then in her community of Humboldt Park, where her first job was in the church mailroom that served as a permanent mailing address for many of the unhoused. And later as a nonprofit leader fighting for affordable housing, and as a member of the Illinois House of Representatives, where during the pandemic, she successfully secured Medicaid coverage for undocumented seniors, making Illinois the first state in the country to offer Medicaid regardless of citizenship. Yeah. Congresswoman Ramirez has been in Congress for less than 6 months, but she's already demonstrating exactly why we need more members with backgrounds, life experiences, and values like hers. The first letter she signed as a member during her first week on the job and before she even had a legislative staff was asking the president to crack down on price gouging and profiteering from corporate landlords that was driving up rents. The first bill she introduced, H.R. 1767, as a member of the Veterans Affairs Committee, would allow students who have been defrauded by for-profit colleges to get their GI benefits back so they could go to another school. And she's the only member of the Committee on Homeland Security who is married to a DACA recipient, a fact she frequently reminds her colleagues across the aisle of. And just last week, she joined 45 of her colleagues in voting against a debt ceiling deal that would cut programs for families who need them while making it easier for the wealthy to cheat on their taxes. Issuing a statement after her vote, Ramirez said, quote, "I am clear for whom I am here. I am here for the communities that will be affected by expedited, dangerous permitting reform that favors the fossil fuel industry over clean air and clean drinking water. I am here for the 1.3 million student loan borrowers in Illinois who are being forced to resume payments even when they are struggling to keep up with the bills. And the 76,000 members of working families and elderly across Illinois counting on TANF cash assistance to keep their families afloat, and the 1.9 million single mothers and children of Illinois counting on SNAP to put food on the table." Congresswoman Ramirez doesn't buy into false binaries about who is worthy or deserving of food or housing or a good job. She knows that we can only build a secure, sustainable future by ensuring our economy delivers what all people need to thrive. And she's helping lead the fight to make that economy a reality in Congress. It's my honor to welcome to the stage Congresswoman Delia Ramirez.
had to check to make sure it wasn't still morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Buenas tardes. Oh, I like that. I want to say thank you to Lindsay for such a warm welcome. As I stood back there, and I heard you talk a little bit about my life journey. I just saw the images of all the organizers, all the ancestors, and all of the people that make it possible for me to serve. And I am filled with gratitude. Many of those people, in some way or another, have a feeling that you know, or you have been for other people like me, so thank you. I want to thank the co-host of the conference whose essential work directly reflects what we need to build for an economy that works for working families, for seniors, for everyday people across our country, rather than fueling what we know is the endless corporate greed. As you heard from Lindsay, my name is proudly Delia Catalina Ramirez, and I am the Congresswoman of the 1st 3rd Congressional District of Illinois and the first of many to come Latinas in the Midwest. I have to make sure I say that, because I, like you, dream of a world where we no longer have to celebrate first and only because we are at the table wherever decisions are being made. Be a woman, be our color, be our identity, whatever it is, we no longer have to celebrate first because we have showed up, we have made it. I'm also the proud daughter of working class immigrants, as you heard from Guatemala, and the wife of Boris, a dreamer. I'm honored to be here at EconCon 23 with all of you. And we are right now living in a profound moment of human history. Not just DC history, not just national history. This is global. Just as we share the air that all of us are struggling to breathe in today, we also share the economy. Our fates are tied. And we certainly have our work set out for us. You see, every single challenge, no matter how daunting it is, it's also an opportunity. We have the opportunity to be in a shared space together, both in person and virtually, to come together around our collective responsibility to build an economy that works for everyone. Am I right? Am I right? I know it's like right after lunch, but I'm gonna need you to help me hype up. It's been a long, chaotic week in Congress where, unfortunately and not surprisingly, folks on the other side of the aisle can't get their things together. So we haven't been able to vote, but we've still been all over in meetings and that wait time. So I need your energy to be able to give back energy because we're all in this together, right? So listen, we're all clear that it is not our current reality. Our economy doesn't work for all of us. It only works for a very, very small group of people and corporations. Our economy is powered by people, but it does not empower people. It doesn't empower the people who grow and harvest our food with their own hands. And it doesn't empower the people who work long shifts in factory lines, the people who provide caregiving to our seniors and to our children. And it doesn't empower the DACA recipients who pay literally billions in taxes and pay into our Social Security every single year, but who won't be able to claim Social Security benefits. And we know that we can and we must change that. Here's our current reality. When Democrats have the majority, we deliver for working families. We make the kind of structural, transformative investments that empower people. And under President Biden, Democrats have delivered historic investments in addressing the climate crisis, improving transportation infrastructure across the board. Job growth is a major victory of the Biden administration. And we also know employees are struggling right now to fill those job vacancies, which could be filled, I say, every single day, if we issued work permits for the 11 million undocumented immigrants and for the thousands of new arrivals seeking sanctuary in cities like Chicago. The cancellation of up to $20,000 in federal student loan debt will make a tremendous impact for millions of borrowers across the country, provided it doesn't get struck down in court. And I'm always going to bring it back to the people who call Illinois home. I can tell you right now that 1.3 million people in Illinois who have benefited from student loan repayment pause, and many of them right now are wondering how they're going to pay their rent in September, in October, when all that they're expected to do is have to choose between the rent that continues to rise and their student loan debt. This is the reality of our people today. And when I knock on doors and talk to people who live in Humboldt Park, in Elgin, in Franklin Park, in Addison, many of them are still worried about how they're going to make ends meet every single month. They're worried that at this rate, they'll never afford home ownership. They're worried that their aging parents and how they're going to be able to take care of them. They're worried about their Social Security check getting garnished because they can't afford the student loan payments when they get turned back in a few weeks. And yes, Democrats deliver for working people, and we should absolutely celebrate those hard-fought victories. But the truth, folks, is we still have a long way to go. Everyday people are still struggling, and it still feels like they're constantly on the brink of disaster. It is dissonant to name that front and center. And yes, we have essential programs and resources and grants that positively impact people, but we also know that our level of investment and the way that we administer access to these resources is never enough to make all people whole. It's only ever just enough to get some people by in the immediate moment, and the people who are left out are consistently Black and brown people, immigrants, asylum seekers, people from low-income backgrounds. And for years, we see political fights erupt over tinkering with domestic spending, whether we're talking about SNAP, we're talking about childcare, Medicaid, TANF, or rental assistance. We are constantly fabricating lines in the sand about who is worthy of food security, who is worthy of health care, who is worthy of housing. It's a false choice that forces us to diminish some people's humanity over others. And I see it in my own neighborhood. Look, I live in Humboldt Park, a community that has been primarily Latino working class for a very, very long time. And over the years, I've watched Latino families who've lived there since the 50s, since the 60s, as homeowners and renters get displaced by gentrification because they can't keep up with the rising cost of housing, and that also includes property taxes and rent. And yet developers would tell them, you should be really grateful. The neighborhood is getting better. You should be really grateful. The value of your property is increasing. What oftentimes we don't talk about is that people want to stay in their home. People care more about staying in their home than they care about how much their property has gone up if they want to stay in their home. But these are the decisions and the challenges that everyday people, not just in Humboldt Park, but across the country, are experiencing. We see this false binary of worthiness and unworthiness around climate crisis that is happening right now. Who is deserving of clean air and who isn't? Who is deserving of clean drinking water and who isn't? Which children are deserving of growing up in communities where the air isn't so polluted by fossil fuel industry that they have the highest rates of childhood asthma? And which children are we allowing this to happen to? You see, folks, this is a policy choice. We see it in our immigration and asylum system. Who is worthy of citizenship? Whose fear and reason for seeking asylum is quote unquote credible? We see it also in student debt. Who is worthy of accessing higher education without being saddled with insurmountable debt, and who's not? So what is the current economic agenda? Let's put it blank, honest, and I'm just gonna say it. It is about wealth hoarding. It is a neoliberal capitalistic framework that only measures economic growth by profits hoarded by a wealthy elite and corporations that don't distribute the profits to workers. It is a system that explicitly fears an empowered people, and it's a system that hasn't contempt for anyone who doesn't immediately contribute to the ever-growing accumulation of wealth. And the tools most frequently used are not designed for us. They are inflicted on us. It's interest rate hikes that drive up the price of groceries, of essential services, of housing, and that make it harder and harder for people to access credit. It's the Republican obsession with cutting domestic spending that families count on for housing, for education, for healthcare, and more. It's not even a week since the debt ceiling deal that is now the law of the land. And at the very least, maintaining the status quo would have been voting on a straightforward suspension of the debt ceiling. And yet, instead, Republicans continue to throw the American people and the American economy into chaos by threatening a default on the national debt unless their demands were met. Their demands do nothing meaningful to increase revenue. You and I both know that. They're instead cruel policies to punish everyday people who are already struggling to get by in the face of rising costs for housing, for food, for utilities, and for more. It's about adding more requirements to SNAP. It's about adding more obstacles to TANF. These are cruel policy choices that have been decided over working people. And then we ask ourselves, I wonder why working class people don't vote at the rate that they should. I wonder why young people don't trust their government. I wonder why those most impacted by the policy choices in Congress seem to not be interested in day-to-day politics and elections. You and I both know exactly why. Because they constantly see how we choose to move in such a way that we don't center them in the way that we make decisions. We don't center them in the way that we create and pass policy. We force student loan repayments, and that is cruel. We favor polluters and prioritize tax cheats, and that is also cruel. And that is why I decided to vote no. I voted no on the so-called Fiscal Responsibility Act bill because it showed us very clearly how little Republicans care about everyday people, even their own constituents. And like you heard Lindsay say earlier, I am clear for whom I am here for. And it's not them, and it's not corporations, and it's not the wealthy. We cannot allow this to create a precedent for the next time we have to address a debt ceiling, for appropriations, or for moving any legislation in Congress. And it couldn't be more clear. Our current economic framework fails to account for social and environmental costs. It fails to account for displacement, for climate displacement, for gentrification displacement, and the legacy and present-day reality of colonization. It doesn't have to be this way. And it won't be easy, but the stakes are too high for us to maintain the status quo. In articulating and advocating for a progressive economic agenda, we have to go deeper than the current terminology and narrative that are so disconnected from our shared humanity. We have to be able to ask ourselves, what does it mean to be human? And how do we move forward an agenda that lets our humanity thrive? Rather than an economic agenda that every day forces us to diminish our own humanity. I mean, how bad we let things get is actually in our hands. And to me, that's both empowering and frightening at the same time. You see, rather than sizing up our economic wellness by the national debt or the GDP, we should be asking questions that prioritize people over profits. How are we decreasing the cost of healthcare? How are we canceling student loan debt? How are we canceling medical debt? How are we ending child poverty? How are we ending poverty as a whole? How are we eliminating food insecurity? How are we eliminating housing insecurity? Beyond how we invest and allocate resources through domestic spending, we are long overdue on pushing for the kinds of revenue streams that bring long overdue accountability for the people and corporations that have profited for years off of working people while standing up aggressive guardrails against price gouging. See, making the wealthy pay their fair share. We hear that all the time. We say it all the time. I probably said it 975 times during my campaign, and I keep saying it, and I keep saying it. And you're not shocked that most of my closest friends here in Congress, many of the freshmen, we say it all the time. So what does that actually mean? And why is it we haven't been able to move the needle? Because in many cases, when we're talking about the cost of running a nation, when we're talking about essential programs, when we're talking about investments, economic development, we always talk about slashing essential services and not generating the revenue necessary and making sure that those that make more, pay more. And it seems like common sense, right? If you pay more, then your taxes should be higher. Yet somehow here, in that chamber I get to work in, during a State of the Union, when that comes up, I look to the right and just people are just like, why would he say that? That doesn't make sense. I mean, like, yeah, and they kind of stutter it that way as well, and I see it. I'm lip reading most of the time. But folks, we have to talk about the new revenue streams that we're going to need to be able to create an economy that works for all of us. And that means that polluters pay for their outsized role in the climate crisis, that big oil and gas that have made billions upon billions for years in exchange for environmental injustices taken out of primarily Black and brown communities and working class people finally pay their fair share, and we hold them accountable. And we can closely correlate the profit-driven actions of the fossil fuel industry with the greenhouse gas emissions, and we have to make sure that it's time that they begin to pay for it. Rather than tinkering with eligibility thresholds year to year for essential life-saving programs, we need to commit to universalizing programs and investing in them accordingly. And that means universal childcare, that means universal health care, and that means universal free college. That also means eliminating the debt ceiling. And it means that we don't use a debt ceiling as a way to leverage and harm our people the way we see continuously happen, and we just saw last week. You see, we're starting this conference in conditions that couldn't make it more clear how urgent our call to action is. When I left my house this morning, the air quality index was 249. The normal healthy range is between 0 to 50. 249 in Washington, D.C. We share the air. And what happens to some of us happens to all of us. We can't afford to keep the status quo on economic policy making. It doesn't work. We don't have time for incrementalism that only further entrenches us in arbitrarily and cruelly deciding who is worthy and who is not worthy of their humanity. Our path forward is structural change that connects us and moves us away from austerity, that goes beyond redistribution and actually empowers people to thrive. And it starts by changing the narrative of what is possible. It starts with every one of you here today, because I don't believe in accidents. Today was designed for us to be here together, to be empowered, to learn from each other, and to connect ourselves in such a way that we see our humanity intertwined in the humanity of others. And that make our resolve be in such a way that we find ourselves working day, sometimes night, every day, but taking care of ourselves, to ensure, I had to make sure to say that, to ensure that we create an economy that works for all of us, because it is our responsibility to change the narrative of what is possible and what we expect for ourselves and for our leaders. So move forward, do the work. You have a partner in me. We will continue to build a Congress that works for all of us, and you must keep us accountable to do that work. So thank you, EconCon. Let's go build together. Thank you.